that setting. So thank you. As you can tell, this is not a highly sort of polished, sorry, you can ignore the ask to unmute. This is not a sort of highly polished production that we're giving. It's a very sort of, not informal is not quite the right way to put it. But this is put together by people on the ground doing work at the moment. So welcome officially to our event, and to our Ukrainian friends, Добрий вечір, ласкаво просимо. And so we'll officially get started now. Thank you so much for letting me know that you could already hear, because I was concerned that people were waiting in a waiting room. So I'm Sarah Wilson-Soki. I'm helping to co-organize this event. We also have here Olga Nikolska from ISAR Єднання, and Jeffrey Glenn, who is with the RSPV Alliance for Ukraine, the Returned Peace Corps, I got the acronym incorrect, RPCV Alliance for Ukraine, Returned Peace Corps Volunteers Alliance for Ukraine, Roman Alexenko, who is also working with the US Peace Corps and has helped us organize this. And we have our featured guests today, Світлана Куц and Сергій Шаповалов, who will both be talking to us about civil society in Ukraine since the 1990s. We are planning, as you've already heard from our comments, we are planning on reserving about 20 minutes at least for questions and answers, which you'll be able to ask through the webinar function. We do want to say that our hopes and goals for this are really to elevate Ukrainian voices of people on the ground doing the really hard day-to-day work of keeping the country going. And in contrast to other more polished events, which also have an important place, we're really trying to give a sense of what's happening for people in Ukraine who are doing that hard day-to-day work, which is why our speakers will be predominantly people from Ukraine doing that work today. And I'll put some links in the chat so that you can see our topic and schedule for going forward. I do want to thank our sponsors as well. The PONARS Eurasia organization is sponsoring us, also the RPCV Alliance for Ukraine. And we also have ISAR Єднання, which is sponsoring us as well. The University of Colorado Boulder is also sponsoring us by providing this webinar platform for us to use. So now what I will do is turn it over to Olga Nikolska, who will provide an introduction for our two featured guests today.
Hello, everyone. It's so nice to see you all here, and the numbers are growing as I watch the participants panel, and I'm so happy about it. So as Sarah already mentioned, this panel will be dedicated to the emergence and development of Ukrainian civil society organizations, and actually more about civic activism and perceptions of people over the years and how they changed. The idea was not to bring you just a lecture on something, but to make it fun also. So we are offering you two wonderful guests that we have with us today, two wonderful panelists, and both of them will be speaking from two completely different viewpoints. One will be more scientific and sociological, and the other will be from the personal perspective. So our first speaker will be Sергій Шаповалов. He represents Democratic Initiatives Foundation named after Редько Кучерєв. And it's the first Ukrainian independent foundation that brought exit polls during the elections to Ukraine. Exit polls results of Democratic Initiative Foundation were always the closest to final scores of election, and sometimes, and in some cases, became decisive for revolutionary events to begin. Sergey will trace the changes in Ukrainian civil society based on on historical events that happened in Ukraine, and not only. And he will be using the various researches that foundation has conducted. So I think I'll turn over to Sergey right now, and I'll present Svetlana when she will be speaking. Thank you.
Good afternoon to everyone. Thank you, dear colleagues, for invitation. Thank you, Olga, for such introduction. I also see the numbers of participants growing, and I feel their responsibility. And I'm afraid to disappoint you, especially in the aspect of making this fun, because we are an organization which makes research of public opinion, and that's why we used to talk operating with numbers, and numbers are not always especially funny. But what we try to do, and what our director, Irina Bekeshkina, who passed away 3 years ago, she was unique in, is making sociology publicly popular, and she was famous in the media for explaining all these numbers in like maybe simple words, like explaining the trends, what all these numbers mean for the development of society and what we can expect in the future. I represent Democratic Initiatives Foundation. We are one of the first Ukrainian think tanks found in 1992. And the idea, when Ilko Kucherev, our founder, who passed away in 2010, the idea was to create a think tank which studies public opinion in order to understand what people think about different social and political events, and broadcast their views of society to our government, and in this way to make the government responsible. In our Ukraine is not an ideal democracy, but at least we have democracy. I've read that Freedom House classifies Ukraine as electoral democracy. The things are not ideal in Ukraine with law, with different aspects, with human rights, with different aspects, but at least we have electoral freedom, and elections are not falsified to such extent like this is done in Russia or other authoritarian regimes on the post-Soviet countries. But and during one of the elections in 2004, the exit poll, which is conducted by Democratic Initiatives Foundation together with our partners from different sociological organizations, Razumkov Center, Kyiv International Institute for Sociology, our data of our exit poll were an argument for a revolution, Orange Revolution, which happened in 2004, because in Ukraine, exit polls are not only like entertainment for voters, it's not only an instrument to know the result of the elections earlier than results are officially announced. In Ukrainian conditions, exit polls are also an instrument of controlling the integrity of elections, because exit poll is based on scientific methods, and if we science doesn't make so big mistakes. Science is not falsifying reality, and if we see a big discrepancy between exit poll, which is based on scientific methods, and officially announced results, it means that there are suspicions that election results were falsified. Talking about the evolution of public opinion in Ukraine, evolution of political outlook of Ukrainians, I was thinking what to start with, because it's quite a complicated topic, the development of our civil society. And I decided to start with talking about foreign policy orientations, because for Ukraine, it was until recently it was one of the biggest social cleavages. Part of Ukraine was always oriented pro-Western oriented. In other regions, there was a big influence of pro-Russian politicians, which were manipulating pro-Russian sentiments, Soviet nostalgia, etc., etc. They were trying to persuade our citizens that Ukraine should build its future together with Russia, etc., etc. There were pro-Russian political parties, and many of members of those parties are now recognized as traitors who worked in the interests of aggressor country. So I will start presenting my slides here. Can you see this? Can you see my slides? Yes. Okay. So if we talk about early years of Ukraine's independence at least until 2014, from the start there was no like dilemma in Ukrainian public opinion about our foreign policy. Our people at the same time were favorable about friendly relations both with Russia and with, for example, European Union. As we can see here, until 2014, the majority of our citizens was even quite positive about the idea of union of Ukraine and Russia and Belarus. At the same time, people had a positive image of European Union, European countries, mainly because of quality of life. Our people always wanted to live like in Europe. So, this was like a Kuchma doctrine, so-called foreign policy doctrine declared by then President Kuchma. It is also known as multi-vector doctrine. And the main idea was to build good relations both with Russia and our European partners. And it correlated with the public opinion in 1990s and early years of from 200 to 210. But yeah, and if we talk about the attitudes towards NATO, we see that in 212, especially in the south and east of Ukraine, not so many people were favorable of joining NATO. The majority wasn't also favorable of military alliances with Russia or other post-Soviet countries. But there wasn't, at that time, there wasn't a clear trend on European and Euro-Atlantic integration of Ukraine. What happened then? Then happened Russian aggression in Crimea. After the Revolution of Dignity, Russian elites felt the moment and the moment of Ukrainian weakness when Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych was expelled out of the country, and Ukrainian elites were weak. At that moment, Russians occupied Crimea and started a war in Donbass. And we see how the 2014 became a turning point in the public opinion. And this pro-Russian trend declined completely. We see that joining NATO became more popular in public opinion, and the pro-Russian attitudes declined to maybe 7 to 10%. And to represent this in even more striking way, we can see that we can see how attitudes toward Ukraine joining some kind of union with Russia and Belarus declined after 2014. It became unpopular opinion. And the same thing with European Union, but European Union was always a popular option. European integration was always a popular option amongst Ukrainians, because, as I said, people wanted to live like in Europe in terms of quality of life. Still, before the full-scale Russian invasion, we see that although if we consider Ukraine in total, the majority of people was favorable of joining NATO, but still in the south and east, only 1/3 of people was sure that Ukraine needs to integrate with NATO. This is, of course, better than 1 or 6% than before Russian invasion, but still not so much. And now, of course, this is research made by National Democracy Institute, NDI, if I'm spelling correctly. We are even afraid to put the question in this way, where the union with Russia is a possible option. Now we cannot even imagine this, and we don't want even to put the question this way. We see that about 90% of Ukrainians want to be a member state of NATO and EU, and even expect this, consider this realistic. Other important changes which took place over the course of our independence are the changes of civic identity. And this is quite a simple thing, that being proud of your citizenship. Now, when Ukraine is fighting for its independence and Ukrainian people are fighting for their freedom, of course, the vast majority of Ukrainians are proud to be Ukrainians, people who make impossible things against protecting ourselves against so-called Second Army of the world. But 20 years ago, not so many people were proud of their citizenship. And moreover, if we asked over many years, we asked a question about hypothetical voting, on hypothetical referendum about Ukraine's independence. Such referendum took place in 1991 when Soviet Union collapsed, and after this referendum, Ukraine was internationally recognized as independent state. And of course, now when Ukraine fights for its independence, we have high numbers of the support of independence of our country by our citizens, which may seem an obvious thing. It is like a very basic sign of civic loyalty to your own country. But once again, 20 years ago, about half of our people were not so sure about whether it is worth supporting the independence of our country. Not this or that politician, but the fact that we have our own country. Of course, now people value our freedom and our own, the possibility to live in our own country much higher than previously. Yeah, about rethinking our history also, this is about the identity shifts. 3 years ago, we asked about the evaluation of Soviet past, and the question was about evaluating of the collapse of Soviet Union, and after that Ukraine became independent state. What people think about this historical event, whether it is positive event or negative event. And if we look at the country in general, we see that about a half of our people consider the collapse of the Soviet Union a positive event, but still we have differences in public opinion among different parts of our society. People who lived in the south of Ukraine and in the eastern regions surprisingly had so-called Soviet nostalgia. And Soviet nostalgia is transforming into pro-Russian sentiments at some point. And these differences in historical memory, different and other signs of national identity were used by Russian propaganda. They were artificially inflaming these differences, trying to disunite Ukrainian society. Russians hoped that disuniting Ukrainian society will help them to capture Ukraine, the whole Ukraine, when Russia starts full-scale invasion. That didn't help them. And now what we see is that amid the big war, these regional differences are erased. Of course, there are some differences, but the balances of opinion is the same in all regions. We see these radical changes compared to even 3 years ago, how people are rethinking their history and was Russia a friend or our friend or enemy in our history. And the final thing I want to emphasize, and this is important to democratic future development of Ukraine, is the perception of citizens' ability to influence their government. In early 19th, the numbers were quite low. We asked our people that just imagine a case when the government of Ukraine or local authorities adopt some decision which violates your rights. And in such situation, do you believe that you as a citizen can do anything about this and protect yourself in relations with your government? And in early 90s, the figures were quite low due to many reasons, including historical trauma from Soviet Union and the whole Ukrainian history over the 20th century, including Holodomor, when several millions of Ukrainians were killed due to Soviet policy of collectivization. But over the course of Ukrainian independence, we see that these numbers are growing, and especially after 2004 Orange Revolution, when people realized their ability to influence their government, and also due to natural reasons, because younger generations, they overcome this trauma, not completely, but they are raised in much more free, independent Ukraine. And what we have now in terms of citizens' faith in their ability to influence the government, these numbers correlate with the number of people who are active in social life, especially those people who support different NGOs, who are volunteering in favor of army. There is not a majority of Ukrainians who support others and other organizations, but it is about 30 to 40% in different years. And why it is important? It's important to me. It looks like we have a crystallized part of society which is ready to take the responsibility not only for their own life, but for the life of their community, and in the broader sense of the whole our country. Because if people are ready to share their material values, invest their money or time in volunteering activities in favor of other people, it means that these people want to change their country for better. And now, after the Russian full-scale invasion, we see much higher numbers. If previously it was about 30 to 40% of such active people who are engaged in financial help to NGOs or to army. Now we see that the numbers are about 70%, and the numbers are even growing over the course of the war. And in the future, these people who are now investing in the survival of our country, of course, they will expect that our country will change for better, and not only expect, they will actively participate in this process, engaging in different types of civic activities aimed at combating corruption, restore reconstruction processes on the level of their communities, and on the level of the whole country, etc., etc. So now we see, and this is the final slide that I wanted to share with you. Of course, the war is a terrible thing, but it creates a possibility to raise more active citizens. Now we are forced to be active just to survive. But after the war, these people will remain active in the civil life and contribute for positive changes of our country. And this is important for Ukrainian democratic development and government accountability in the future.
Thank you so much, Sergey. I don't know, but for me, you managed to make numbers a lot of fun. It was a great thing that we saw all these changes over the years, and thank you from the bottom of my heart for all the work that you've done to make it 20 minutes. And I think it's an impossible task to give out so many information during this short time. So thank you again. Stay with us. And I'd like once again encourage our viewers to put their questions in the chat, and we will be very grateful if you wrote the name of our speaker and then your question, if it's aimed at some particular person, and if not, we will present present the question, and then speakers will decide whether they are ready to answer. And,
just one short pause very quickly to make sure it's working. I think they'll have to use the Q&A function. Someone had their hand up, but it's gone down. But you can use the Q&A function, but probably not the chat function if you have questions. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's fine. That was my mistake. So we're perfect anyway. So our next speaker is one of the people who was a part of civil society almost from the very beginning. Swietlana Kutz joined the movement in 1994. She has established and ran several NGOs. In 2007, she initiated and founded National Philanthropy Award in Ukraine. She is the author and founder of the course of professional fundraisers. She wrote many papers. She did numerous researches, and I could continue to talk about her for hours, but I think our participants will gladly listen to what she has to say about the development of Ukrainian civil society from her personal perspective. Please, Svetlana.
Yeah, thank you so much for this wonderful presentation, and I'm really happy to greet all your guests, our honorable audience, and thank the organizers for inviting me. Eventually, I'm really privileged to tell my very simple, very ordinary personal story on the background of the huge and tremendous changes that happened along Ukrainian civil society, because civil society is not only NGOs, not only civil society organization, that's Ukrainian people who managed to grow and change and impact and create new organizations, initiatives, and donate for the army these days. Oh, my personal story is quite long. I started quite early when it was very early times of Ukrainian independence, and it was really economic and social crisis. I was young and worked for the National Academy of Sciences, and I learned from there about civil society in America. Good example. And I learned about NGOs, and I'm really amazed of the power and economic power of NGO sector, non-profit sector in America, and its impact on social and economic and political life in America, though they directly do not influence the politicians, but eventually that creates the society, the democratic society, I mean, the democracy itself. So I was really, really amazed by the very phenomenon, and I joined an organization that was developing civil society in Ukraine that time. It was the program funded by USAID and funded by the Eurasia Foundation. We were developing three-sector cooperation, we were developing NGOs, but we had no idea what is civil society because we never learned about it in Soviet times. It was the gap and the lack of education. So I went to America for the fellowship in City University of New York, worked with Honorable Professor Kathleen McCarthy, who is one of the recognized professors in the field. And it was very exciting time, and I started to study what is the sector is, and I returned to Ukraine with a plan how to develop civil society. This plan was presented at several conferences and was really converted to the research findings. Anyway, I returned, I created the group of my co-thinkers, and we established organization, which was called the Center for Philanthropy in Ukraine. But when I joined Ukrainian civil society, the whole landscape was like, you know, that there were eventually three types of organization that time, I mean, in the early 90s. The first type was converted from former Soviet Union formal organizations, and they existed, they converted, that were veteran associations, war veteran associations, that were associations for peace. There were journalist unions that existed in Soviet times. They were very pro-ideological, but still they converted. They like any politicians, they just joined the whole movement for the independence of Ukraine, and Red Cross existed that time, Protection of Nature societies existed that time. So eventually they existed. They were quite separate. They never came into contact with other organizations. Mostly they never get together even for themselves. There was another group. That group, I can say that they were patriotic organizations that were renovated, Prosvita. Ukrainian Helsinki organization came from the clandestine, yeah, because they were partisan in Soviet time. Former dissidents created these organizations. Women community organizations that were created by dissidents, and they were mostly focused on national revival. That was kind of, you know, a lot of awareness raising function about Ukraine, about the values Ukraine has, about patriotic history, all the things connected to Ukrainian spirit revival. And and that time we had the third group of NGOs. I just divided them into three, but eventually the third group was like Democratic Initiatives Foundation, that were professional NGOs, I must say. These organizations created from former academia, from specialists in television, specialists in environment. So we started to have the professional organizations, and in the course of the development of the sector, these organizations turned out to be the most active. Now we almost do not have any organizations with this pro-Soviet shadow. Even those who were like Red Cross, they are trying to modernize, to be more organizationally capable, though still it's quite problematic. But those professional NGOs were growing with the support of international donors, with a lot of learning, a lot of travel, a lot of exchange, and we were growing. I must say that in the year 2007, after the Orange Revolution, we had the first Ukrainian concept of civil society and government cooperation. That's how it all developed. Then there were some kind of disappointments in the years when we had this autocratic government of Yanukovych. It was very difficult to influence the state, the government. It was very Ukrainian civil society, like Russian experience, they tried to suppress, to make us international agents. But we were able to withstand because we had the wonderful experience of Orange Revolution, which was not really organized by some NGOs, but we had several movements of citizens like Opora. This is very living and very active organization in Ukraine these days, and it grown from Orange Revolution of the year 2004. We have also organizations that grown from the revolution of dignity that now is very active. These mostly youth organizations that pursue new values, European values. So Ukrainian civil society, together with the whole society, was just integral part of the whole society. And I just can add this, because what we developed, we now see huge people movement towards philanthropy, people volunteering, people participate, people are really becoming citizens and ready to influence and impact the future of Ukraine, because we still see the big anxiety about the war and about the finish of the war, and about the future of Ukraine after the war. That's very important. This spirit, this solidarity was formed through all these years, and I think that civil society organizations played a huge role in this. Maybe I will finish with this and we will continue with the questions. Although I also have some funny stories about the civil society, but still. Yeah. I always wanted to share.
Maybe we could hear some funny story.
I just wanted to share the story about the founder of Democratic Initiative Foundation, Ilko Kucherev. I think that in some very, very early years, like year 2005 or 2007, he approached the General Secretary of NATO. He was visiting Ukraine, and he approached him with the application of his family to be accepted, to be involved into NATO. It was the episode that attracted a lot of attention of Ukrainian press and also international press, because there were no precedent, that family, if country doesn't want, then family wanted to join NATO. And it was really, really the input into the whole idea of developing and understanding, awareness raising about NATO and its role, that it's not that military only and security only union, but also the union that supports certain values that are very important for every Ukrainian. And it's a growing, and statistics just proves it. So Ukrainian civil society was always very inventive, innovative, and creative, I must say.
Thank you so much, Svetlana. That was a great story. And now we're trying to collect the questions.
I'm happy to start with a question while people think, and then also you're able to raise your hand on Zoom if you're, for some reason, you're having trouble with the Q&A function. but you should be able to submit questions with the Q&A at the bottom of your screen, I think. You probably cannot post into the chat, but you can raise your hand as well if there's some problem with the Q&A function. But I always have lots of questions, so I don't mind asking one right now. So I thought it was thank you to you both, first of all. I mean, this is just enormously insightful and very grateful for your time. I thought it was very interesting what Sergey Shapovалов said about that war creates more active citizens, and that there is this, in a way, this kind of silver lining of civic activism, that it's united and created this identity and community, and in a way that's very, very inspiring and a model for the world. And then also how Світлана Куц was talking about civil society organizations working with all of society in this transformation that's happening. So for both of you, I wanted to ask, what do you see as the biggest challenges going forward for civil society organizations in particular? What is their biggest challenge to operating today?
Maybe Svetlana can start? Or me? Or you? Me? Okay. Well, what about biggest challenges? I emphasized about, during my presentation, I emphasized on the factor of unity of Ukrainian civil society. I mean, in a broad term, not in terms of civil society organizations, but the society as a whole. Really, after the Russian full-scale invasion, these regional differences have erased, and moreover, not only the horizontal unity of Ukrainian society has strengthened, but also so-called, let's call it vertical unity. I mean, the unity of Ukrainian government and Ukrainian society. Because Ukrainian people have a rich experience of opposing different governments, and even in independent Ukraine, firstly, Ukrainians have high expectations about new presidents or other politicians whom they elect, and a year after, Ukrainians are disappointed. And in 2021, public trust towards Zelensky was negative. I mean, there were more people who distrust the president compared to those who trust. The war changed this situation dramatically, and the public trust in the government, especially in the president, has raised. And now Ukrainian president has about 80% of public trust, which is unprecedented really in our history. But what possibly can violate this unity? Possibly this is corruption, unfortunately, because in times of war, this negative social phenomenon is very emotionally loaded, and I fear that at some point people can be disappointed, can start to be more disappointed with our government, and this is very harmful. This is a real danger for national security in time of war. Because, as I said previously, Ukrainian society should in turn be united internally, and the Ukrainian government and Ukrainian society should fight for the same things. And I know that among civil society organizations which were dealing with the issues of corruption before the full-scale war, there was a dilemma. How to research and advocate certain decisions in this area and not harm the national security. because in times of war, these are additional risks, and we know that Russian propaganda is actively using the issue of corruption, showing Ukraine to our partners as a corrupted state, and why you need to invest your money and support corrupt state. Yes, so many of such anti-corruption organizations they shifted their activities to the research of collaborators inside Ukraine, or they started to monitor Russian war crimes, etc., etc. But now the problem of corruption hasn't disappeared, unfortunately, due to the war. And they returned, such civil society organizations returned to their investigations, etc., etc., because this is a very negative social phenomenon, especially in times of war, because it harms both the unity of society, and in hard terms, we are losing money for which we can buy weapons or help people who suffered from the war to rebuild their houses, etc., etc. And that is why I see this issue as very harmful, both for internal unity of Ukrainian society and for long-term support of our partners, long-term support of Ukraine by our partners.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Speaking about the future, I think that each organization that was created, to serve its beneficiaries firstly and mostly, and these organizations should be very clear about the future needs of their beneficiaries after the war, during the war, and after the war. That's the most important, for them to keep on to their missions and to pursue the issues that is really the issues that they were created for. They exist for their raison d'être. But speaking about general impact of the civil society, anti-corruption is also a big movement, and there are a lot of professional organizations doing. But I think that watchdog function is very important. So organizations should be very well prepared to advocate the interest of their beneficiaries in the flow of reconstruction of Ukraine. That's the most important topic, and the first step to take to reach this flow of being active participant for reconstruction in the reconstruction of Ukraine.
Thank you. Thank you to both of you for those answers. And we have several more questions now. I see that Andy Linnick has his hand raised. So I'm going to, here, Andy, if you're ready, I'll allow you to talk. You can ask your question directly.
Yeah, hi. I want to say hello to Roman, and it's Lennick, not Leonard, but that's my typing. And Sarah, thank you for putting this on. So my question is, because of the invasion, there is an increase in patriotism. Does that have a dampening effect on people's corruption, on those in power? You know, is the patriotism tempering the habit of corruption?
And either of you is welcome to respond.
Svetlana, maybe you can start this time.
Okay, thank you. I just need some explanation. What is tempering in broader term? Can you please explain?
Oh, and if you raise your hand again, Andy, I can allow, I'll allow you to talk again. There we go.
Okay, so to temper means to tamp down, to lower. And my question is, you know, if you're a patriot and you want to support your country, and I think in people's hearts, they know that corruption, that stealing, you know, is a bad thing. So is there more of is there less corruption because there's increased patriotism? That's the easiest way to say it.
It's very difficult to measure, and increased patriotism, the best to say that this patriotism is not used for populistic reasons, but it can be the mask for any bad reasons. We call them marauders, you know, that's people who make money out of war, make profit out of war, and it's quite difficult to recognize. And we need the majority of data is closed these days, so we can't follow the budget spending, we can't follow how it is spent. There are some only data that is digged by anti-corruption activists, but in the regular ordinary terms there were no investigation whether it's grown or not. But patriotism rather impacted the donations, that's it. But I can't say that it somehow lowered or raised the level of corruption, because corruption is also here, like, you know, like a phantom, you know. That's kind of, in the majority of cases people simply do not corrupt anybody. But here this is, yeah, it is only the problem of procedures in the government spending. That's the problem. But now they are closed, and it's very difficult for investigators. But we have growth of investigators. That's good.
And I think if Andy, if you had one quick follow-up, and then we have some other questions.
Okay, just that, по-перше, дякую, я сам українець, батьки були з України, and we have corruption in the United States too. We've just made it very elegant and legal. So you know, I hope that as Ukrainian society matures, and especially after this war, and when I was there and Roman introduced us to so many wonderful organizations, that there will be just a general acceptance that corruption and an expanding mature society are mutually exclusive. So thank you very, very much.
If I may add a couple of words to this question, I think that talking about this issue, we should differentiate between two different phenomena. The first one is, it is called petty corruption, like small corruption on the domestic level. I mean, paying bribes maybe to the doctor, or to receive driving license faster than according to the official procedures. And according to all public opinion polls, the level of domestic corruption is quite low in Ukraine, and there are about maybe 3 to 5% of people who encountered personally some situations in which they were either forced to bribe someone, or they made it by their own initiative. The other issue is the so-called grand corruption and political corruption, and about 70 to 80% of our people are sure that our politicians, members of parliament, are from time to time engaged in such activities. And if we talk about patriotism, personally, I'm sure that MPs whose corrupt activities are uncovered, they are patriotic, quite patriotic. They do not want Ukraine to be occupied by Russia, because in this case, they will lose everything they have. But nevertheless, it appears that this patriotism is not enough for them not to abuse their power for private interest. And they hope to do both things at the same time, to remain the patriot and publicly represent themselves as patriots, but at the same time gain some money from illegal activities. Somehow this coexists in people's minds. I think that enforcement of, we have beautiful laws. The most important thing is their enforcement. then when such people who want to engage in some corrupt practices, they should, in their head, evaluate the risks of being uncovered and imprisoned as very probable risks. And then they will fear of not avoiding their responsibility. So patriotism, to me, it looks like patriotism is not a decisive factor of lowering corruption, unfortunately.
Thank you. And I think we have two questions in the Q&A that I want to prioritize, but Roman, I think that you had a follow-up to this that you wanted to give.
Yeah, just very briefly. That's a good question, Annie. And I think, there's a double pressure on civil society and civil society organizations, including influencers and public figures that are not fighting or fighting in the war to keep the government transparent and accountable. I'll give you one example. A couple of weeks ago, the MPs, predominantly the Zelensky's party, voted for disclosing their revenues in the past year. But then the second kind of decision that they voted for was to keep them closed for a year from public. In other words, they didn't want Ukrainian citizens to see which MPs and which government officials have bought expensive stuff during the past year and a half. And it only took one post from a famous civil society activist who's now fighting in the war to submit a petition to the president's office to revoke the decision and to invoke President Zelensky to put a veto that decision. And usually the Ukrainians are giving 30 days to sign the petition. Well, in this case, it only took 3 days. And I think the number is like 20,000 people need to sign the petition in order for the presidents to actually review it and then make a decision. Well, in this case, it took 3 days to exceed the number of 20,000 for the presidents to review it. And it only took the president maybe a few days to actually veto the MP's decision not to disclose their revenues. So that's an illustration of how civil society, whether they're fighting, civil society leaders and public figures, whether they're fighting or not fighting to keep the government officials and MPs accountable. So, basically, I hate saying there are multiple fronts to this war because there was only one, and that's people fighting in the war, physically fighting. But civil society organizations have another responsibility of ensuring that the government, even in the times of war, and I must say that in the war, any country that is at war, there's massive cases of corruption. You pick any war in history, you'll find that a lot of people try to make money off of the war. So all I want to say is it's really in the hands of these public figures, influencers, and medias that do investigative reporting that are still pretty active and quite influential. And that's what kept Ukraine going all these years. Pick any revolution or Maidan, and you'll find cases when the media and civil society public figures played a very key role in reversing the government's decisions on corruption or allegations of corruption.
May I add
Thank you very
couple
much.
of words just to finish this topic. I didn't want to start this discussion about corruption so that everyone has an image of Ukraine as totally like corrupted country, and this is the main problem. Recently, I watched, I checked a corruption perception index made by Transparency International, and Ukraine in 2022 improved its status compared even to 2021, although the authors could say that Ukraine was forced to close many open data sources, and that's why we are lowering your scores. So we are sorry, we understand that you had no other option, but the objective situation is that you closed the data, and that's why we are lowering your scores. No, the really situation is improving. So we have successes also, and many successes. It's just so emotionally loaded topic that even a single case which becomes known in the context of war, it causes so many emotions that how could this happen? When people are giving their lives for the freedom of our country, and this or that official is trying to gain money for his or her private interests. So we have successes in this sphere also.
Thank you very much for that. It's such a complicated issue to both acknowledge that corruption is a challenge, but not to promote a negative stereotype and an unfair stereotype that Ukraine is deeply corrupt, or is not. I want to be very clear, is not deeply corrupt. We have some questions in the Q&A that I'd like to get to. The first of which from Ken Phillips, who has very patiently waited. Thank you. It says, Svetlana, it's joyful to see you here. When is your next workshop for civil society development? I want to be there.
Okay, thank you. I will tell privately.
Okay. And then we also have, we will go just a few minutes past the hour. If you can stay with us on the webinar, please do. And thank you to Sergey and Svetlana for any additional time you have. We have a question from Barbara Leopold from the Center on Philosophy and Civil Society at SUNY. Philanthropy, not philosophy. Philanthropy and civil society at SUNY. Are NGOs, CSOs in a position to think long-term, even while things are so precarious now? Is there room for planning for work directed at trauma, rebuilding, etc., or is it too soon?
Mm-hmm. I think, yeah, that's a very important question. And we have a huge humanitarian sector that arrived to Ukraine. Firstly, they were absolutely, I had the impression that they do not understand Ukraine, you know. And now humanitarian sector trying to adjust, to adopt to our realities. They are helping a lot for Ukrainian organizations just newly created with new knowledge and preparations for trauma. And there are several coalitions of NGOs now building on their efforts around long-term planning, because it's very serious and important question. So I think, and we appreciate all the international support that is coming here. You know, we understand and we appreciate that we do not have enough knowledge to fight in such conditions, to work in such conditions.
Thank you for that. Oh, and yes, Olga has her hand up. And then we have a question from the top. Yes.
I just wanted to jump in for a second, because the answer to Barbara's question, I have some information on that, because our organization, ISAR Єднання, was working on with international donors predominantly on institutional support of organizations. It's the kind of support when you partially fund the wages of people working there and provide some funding for operational activities, just in order to preserve, you know, the organizations that are struggling and working on various fronts, as Roman mentioned. In addition to that, we started to think about the reconstruction, rebuilding, and all the topics surrounding it, like 2 months into war. And the sector is actively working on developing various activities and on researching the possibilities of how it can be done in future. The other question is whether the government wants the civil society to participate in these processes, but we'll leave it to some other sessions, I think. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And we have a very good question from Jeffrey Glenn, who unfortunately had to step out already, but he asks, do you believe that the Western world and Russia have underestimated the role that civil society development have played in its military success and in maintaining civilian and social services?
Russia underestimated absolutely, because they killed their civil society in early years, because when Putin arrived, he killed all the civil society there, and he underestimated. He never understood the role of civil society. That's why they really underestimated. But I can't say that about our Western counterparts, because our Western counterparts always said, and even I remember when we were sitting and talking in some 10-year or something, that actually the Ukraine is the last fortress of democracy in the region because of civil society. And Ken Phillips raised hand. I think that Ken was there.
He did, although Sergey, did you want to add something to that answer? And then yes, I was about to message Ken Phillips. I will have you unmute yourself in just a moment, Ken.
Yeah, just I wanted just to say that even if we analyze like military power, and many analysts, both Russian and Western, were engaged in comparing Ukraine and Russia in military terms. And of course, if we just compare the number of tanks or fighter jets, Ukraine is not in favorable position, especially. But it seems that really at that moment, the factor of Ukrainian society was ignored, and Ukrainian will of resist. I found several pictures. Like these are meetings, like public rallies that were organized maybe several weeks, 1 or 2 weeks before Russian invasion started. And Ukrainian civil society warned the whole world that we will resist, and please consider this factor. We will not give up. And if there were more faith, like if our partners believed more in Ukrainian readiness to resist and survive as a country, we could receive heavy weapons long before even, because as far as I understand, there was a little faith that Ukraine will survive as an independent country, and many governments were afraid of supporting Ukraine with really heavy weapons. But if the factor of civil society was considered, this makes Ukrainian chances much higher, and this influences the readiness of our partners to support us with serious weapons. And if Ukraine was provided with these weapons even before the war, the whole war could be prevented from even starting. So the factor of civil society and its readiness to resist the aggressor, unfortunately, was very, very underestimated, if not to say ignored. And it, as we all have seen, it appeared to be a crucial factor in Ukrainian resistance.
Thank you. And we've had, I'm going to Ken Phillips. You should be able to unmute yourself now. You've been waiting patiently to ask a question.
It's more of a compliment of praise. My first time in Ukraine was 1994, and I've been working with Svetlana so many times. I absolutely love her. My comment really is, thank you, all three of you, what you're doing not only for Ukraine, but for the world. When I was in Poland in November, Polish friends said, Ukraine has to win, otherwise Poland is next. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
And thank you
you
too.
for that. And Roman, yes, if you'd like to.
Yes,
And-
I'm gonna say something that may sound controversial to our Western audience here, but I think of all the civil society institutions in Ukraine, the armed forces is the only civil society institution that has so much power at influencing the government and influencing civil society at large in Ukraine. Because one thing you have to remember is it's not a professionally trained army that you may have in your countries, where people are born in the families of the military, they graduate from West Point, and then they join the military and they get paid a lot. They choose the military as their career. As of February of 2022, Ukrainian armed forces has sort of become the melting pot where Ukrainian citizens from all walks of life, doctors, educators, government officials, civic activists, IT specialists from all walks of life ended up in the trenches. And in my opinion, as dramatic as it may sound, despite all the atrocities that this war brings to Ukraine, I see some benefit at all of these folks sitting around the campfire in the trenches, smoking cigarettes, talking about their past lives and their future lives and their families and children. And I see bonds forming in the combat zone. And these bonds, in my opinion, will have a great impact on further development of civil society after Ukraine's victory. So again, one distinction is that Ukrainian army is a melting pot where all the civil society actors are now unified. They're all fighting for what is meaningful to them. For instance, I have friends who are prominent LGBTQ plus leaders in Ukraine who signed up, took up arms, and now defending Ukraine. They're promoting their agenda of equality. And then in the trenches, they meet folks who are more traditional, more orthodox. But then in these dialogues that happen on a daily basis, I see some solutions already being formed so that Ukraine, when the victory is ours, is going to move forward, if not leap forward, having that kind of glue that bonds all of these people together.
Thank you for that. And to all of you, if there's any final questions, now would be the time to ask, but we are a bit over time, so I'll go ahead and start to wrap things up and just say also Дякую and a huge thank you to Sергій Шаповалov and Світлана Куц for joining us, and also to Olga Nikolska at ISAR Єднання, who is helping to organize this, of course, and also to Roman Aleksenko, who is helping to organize this as well, and for the work you're doing, but also because last week when we had the former U.S. Ambassador John Herbst speaking, he highlighted that Ukrainian civil society has this unique and long-standing history of being very remarkable, and that it really is a uniquely active and uniquely strong civil society, but we also see that in civil society organizations. And so I think as all of our attendees today can see, that's clearly true, that this is a uniquely remarkable, both civil society in general and civil society organizations in Ukraine are just doing remarkable work to keep the country going. I will turn finally to Olga Nikolska if you would like to give some final remarks before we end.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone, for being here. We are very happy that you joined us today and spent a little bit over an hour here with us. And we would like to invite you to continue joining us. And we will have next Friday, we will have a very interesting topic to my mind. It's called Ukrainian CSOs Filling Governance Gaps. And we will be talking to Ukrainian prominent organizations that stepped in when the war started and assisted their local authorities or national authorities to perform the daily functions that are needed in order to keep Ukraine going. This will be a fascinating event, I can promise you that, because we selected excellent speakers. So you are invited to join us next Friday, 10 a.m. EST time or 5 p.m. Kyiv time, and we will be happy to see you all again. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, everyone, for being here today.
Thank you.
Thank you too.